Hello everyone and welcome to my review of Song of Susannah. Whew, I'm a little bit emotional. I'll admit that. I'm a little bit emotional because I spent all of last year reading through the multiverse of The Dark Tower. Up until last year, I hadn't really read any Stephen King, and now I've read 21 of his books. And I'm getting close to the end of the journey now, and I'm scared. I'm scared for the characters. I'm scared for myself and my own emotional mental health as I come to the end of the series. And I'm also scared for you as well, because I know so many of you love this series, right? So for a lot of you that have been watching and reading along with me, this is maybe your favorite book series. And I just want so badly to end on a high note because I want to stay friends and I want us to have this thing in common, you know? But I also know that I have to be honest about my reaction to the ending, and so those two things, like I say, all right, I'm gonna be okay. Let's just talk about Song of Susannah, which is the penultimate book in my journey to the Dark Tower. Last week, I read Wolves of the Calla, which I really enjoyed, and there were some major reveals. By the way, this is a spoiler review, just in case, you didn't realize. And this book, Song of Susannah, picks up where the last book left off immediately after the Battle of Calibran Sturges. One of the big twists in the last book is that a lot of the characters realized that they are fictional characters that have been created by a writer called Stephen King, a writer that none of them had heard of before. And so now they realize that, do we exist? They kind of have an existential crisis. One of the fascinating things that I've always found about Stephen King, and I think it's probably one of the things that a lot of his readers really enjoy about his writing, or it kind of contributes to an aspect of his writing that they enjoy, is that Stephen King doesn't really plan out his books. Famously, he writes by the seat of his pants rather than plotting out everything that's going to happen. And so as we go along through the journey, Stephen King is kind of discovering what's going to happen as we discover it. And that can lead to some really unpredictable and wacky, zany outcomes. This, I think, being one of them. And that really makes me wonder, did Stephen King have any idea that he was going to pull something like this? When he was writing The Gunslinger or maybe Wizard and Glass, something like that, did he have an inkling that he was going to make these characters kind of aware in a really meta way that they were fictional characters in a book? I think almost certainly he didn't know. We also learned that Susannah, who suffers from dissociative identity disorder, she realizes that one of her alternate personalities, Mia, has taken over her body and is now pregnant. And this revelation sets the stage for this book, Song of Susannah. So whilst Father Callahan is having his kind of existential crisis about whether or not he exists, what is the nature of existing, the rest of the group are kind of making a decision about what their strategy is going to be, because they have to keep making their way to the Dark Tower. There's been something called a beam quake, which is when one of the beams is severely damaged or broken. And so they're really running out of time here. And so they make a plan. Listen, some of us need to go and meet Calvin Tower and go and get the deed for the lot. And then some of us need to go and get Susannah and deal with the unborn demon child that she's carrying. Madness, isn't it? At this stage, Eddie is losing it. And look, I don't know if I've ever mentioned this. I don't think I've ever mentioned this in my reviews, but I've never fully bought into the relationship between Eddie and Susannah. And by that, I mean that I never bought into a romantic relationship. We're told over and over again that Eddie and Susannah are in love. They love each other so much, and they call each other honey and darling and sugar. And they've got this kind of surface level love, but I don't remember ever seeing quiet moments with Eddie and Susannah when they reflect on their love for one another. I think the closest thing we've ever seen to affection is that Eddie always insisted on pushing Susannah's wheelchair over difficult terrain. But personally, I think that's something that a friend would do for another friend, you know? So, as far as a relationship between Eddie and Susannah goes, it's one of those unfortunate things where I just never really bought into it. And you can tell me why I'm wrong, and I enjoy it when you do, quite frequently. There's also a part where Jake tells Father Callahan that the red eye of the Crimson King is hunting down Susannah. And listen, right? This sounds so much like the Eye of Sauron from the Lord of the Rings. With the bleeding over of other works of fiction, it wouldn't surprise me if the ka-tet come across Frodo Baggins and Smeagol when they get to the Dark Tower. You know, that if something like that happens, I think I'm going to lose my mind. So what they decide is that the four of them are going to split up into two teams, and Roland and Eddie are going to go find Susannah, and then Jake and Father Callahan are going to find Calvin Tower, who they need the deed from, which contains the rose, which is a representation of the Dark Tower in our world. Don't worry. It all makes sense. It all makes sense. But when they try and pass through the portal, Carr has other ideas for them, and they just get completely switched in different directions. So now it's Jake and Callahan that are going to be finding Susannah in New York, and then it's Eddie Dean and Roland that are going to be finding Calvin Tower. And actually, speaking of Susannah and the hunt for Susannah, we get caught up with her and Mia in New York. And I really like these opening scenes where we see the New York businesswoman kind of seeing Susannah materialize. She's this black woman with white legs, and then she just runs up. I think the woman's name is Trudy. She just runs up to Trudy and she's like, "I'm gonna shank you if you don't give me your shoes," you know? And the woman she gets a little bit unhinged by it, which is understandable. Then Susannah, who is just desperately trying not to give birth in the middle of a New York City street, they find this little ivory turtle, which is called a skolpadder. And this skolpadder is like a really mysterious thing, right? She uses it to control people. It becomes an item of obsession, not unlike, to use another Lord of the Rings reference, not unlike the ring, the precious, right? Where everyone just is enamored with it. They want to touch it. Oh, can I hold it for 1 second? No, you may not. But she can use it to manipulate everyone, and everyone becomes susceptible to her needs, including this poor Swedish guy who just walks up and he just goes, I think he's the one that gives it the name Skulpada. And she uses this to say, "You just give me some money." And he just hands it over. Yeah. All right, now what you're going to do is you're going to go and book a hotel room for me, and then you're going to forget all about this. And then she says, "Oh, and by the way, your bowel movements are going to be really good for the rest of your life." Nice little gift she gives him in the end. When they get to the hotel room, Susannah and Mia have a palaver where they kind of meet face to face for the first time. And the weird thing about this, I thought, one of the weird things about this, is how Susannah seems so shocked that Mia is white. You know, she's like, "Wait, you're white?" But she already saw her legs. So what? I mean, why didn't she know that? It was just a little thing, but I just thought it was kind of strange. They meet in this imagined reality where Susannah finds out that the baby that her/Mia is carrying is actually Roland's. I don't know why I didn't kind of connect the dots earlier on. I feel like I probably should have connected the dots, because there's actually been 2 scenes in this series where someone has coupled with a demon. and one was Susannah, or Detta Walker kind of took over, right? In the Wastelands. Was it the Wastelands? And then, of course, Roland had sex with a demon in the Gunslinger. And I just don't know why I didn't connect the dots. But now, what I'm afraid of at this point is the conversation, that kind of awkward conversation between Eddie and Roland, you know? Roland Deschain.
You are the father!
I mean, something like this could be the thing that finally divides the ka-tet. You know, Eddie's come a long way. I think this could be the thing that tips him over the edge. I mean, in those circumstances, I'd probably reach for the pipe, you know? I think Mia is quite an interesting villain in this. I don't know if I fully think of her as a villain or as a tool of the villains. She's definitely a subversion of your expectations of what a demon would be. When you think of a demon, you don't naturally think socially anxious, really deeply maternal, you know? But she can't speak to strangers. She is submissive to the Crimson King and his cronies. She gets him on the phone and she's saying, are you gonna let me keep the baby? Please, you said you'd let me keep the baby. All she wants in the world, more than anything, and she will make any sacrifice, is to be a mother, is to have someone of her own who she can love. And in a way, that makes her quite a sympathetic character. The whole time she's just begging on the phone. Detta Walker is talking to her kind of like inside her head saying, listen, you idiot, they're not going to let you keep the baby. You're just a vessel. You're a babysitter. And she's just like, no, you don't know. They made a deal. Yeah, just a really tragic kind of a character. And thanks to her deal with Walter, she gave up immortality just for what she believes is going to be 7 years with her little chap. That's how badly she wants to be a mother. At one point, she says something along the lines of, an eternity in hell would be a fair price to pay just to see one smile on the lips of my baby boy. Like, that would be enough for me. Yeah, just sad, isn't it? One of the other reasons that I liked the palavers between Susannah and Mia is because it also kind of cleared up a lot of questions that I had, especially pertaining to the hierarchy of the Crimson King and his organization. So at the top, you've got the Crimson King. And then just below him, you've got kind of like the Prime Minister, which is Walter or Randall Flagg or the Man in Black. And then just below him, you've got Richard Sayer. And he is like one of the top members of the Cantoi. And then below that, you've got the Cantoi / the Low Men. And then their job is to go out and recruit breakers. And the breakers' job is to break the beams that are supporting the tower. Oh my God, it's starting to make sense. And it only took me 21 books to find out what the fuck is going on. We're also told in these palavers how magic receded from Roland's world, and in its place technology took over. And one of the things that I'm starting to understand is how this world is kind of connected to, or is like a culmination of human creativity. That's what it's made up of. And one of the things that I remembered when I was reading this book is how Roland always talks about how there's no paper in his world. And I just find it interesting that there's no paper. A lot of people have lost the ability to read and write. And so they're not able to create any new works of literature, you would imagine, right? And is that the reason that magic kind of receded? Because creativity just went away and stories, new stories just went away. And so mechanical efficiency stepped in its place. Is that kind of the message of this series? Is that the reason that we're told over and over again, there's no paper? because, like I say, they're not writing anything. They're not reading anything. So after all of that, we're reunited with Roland and Eddie, and they are immediately dropped into the middle of a shootout. And the two of them are absolutely in their element. Bullets are just flying everywhere, and Eddie's kind of like stumbling along. He hit his head when he was coming through the portal, so he's kind of semi-conscious, and then Roland just grabs him and smack, smack, smack. Eddie wakes up like, yeah, I'm ready. And Roland's like, that's my boy. Bodies are being used as human shields. Innocent women are just catching strays. Shards of glass are going in people's faces. It's all kicking off. And all right. Calm down. It's a book review. Jay. Calm down. Breathe. Sorry, got a little bit excited there. And then in amidst all this chaos, who does Roland see? It's Andolini. So this is a character that Roland has actually seen die twice, I think, already. And this whole scene, this whole situation, this is just what gunslingers do for fun. This is them in their element, and Roland is actually loving it. I don't remember the last time that Roland was this happy. Yeah, he seems happy, doesn't he? Anyway, Eddie and Roland make a narrow escape thanks to this bloke in a flannel shirt. His name's John Cullum, I think. And he tells them when they get back to his house that he knows where Calvin Tower is. And Calvin Tower, apparently, he's been walking around town, blabbing to everyone who will listen, all about all stuff he shouldn't be telling them. Listen, I knew this little rat. I said in the last video, I didn't like him. I still don't like him. In this scene that's coming up specifically, I really didn't like him. Drove me crazy. Anyway, he's decided that he doesn't want to sign over the empty lot. He's having second thoughts. I'm getting a migraine with this geezer. In my journey to the Dark Tower, I've met a lot of terrifying characters. I've met dancing clowns and vampires and ancient beings that possess people and then burst out of them like skin suits. But I don't think I've met any one of Stephen King's characters yet that I wanted to punch this badly. And it's crazy because normally, I always say one way to get me to love a character in a book is to make them love books. You know, that's like a little trick that I think authors sometimes do, is they'll create a character and say, oh, you should like this character. They like books and so do you. And Calvin Tower loves books. I love books. I should like this fella. But I like books for the stories, you know? I like books for what's in them. He likes books for the exclusivity. You know, he's a collector, right? I mean, he's a reader as well, but he's a collector. He likes books for books. He's arrogant. He's childish. He's greedy. He's conspiracy-minded. Just sign the contract. Sign the contract.
Sign the contract, big boy. Sign the contract.
And Eddie is just on the edge, you know? He's already got everything going on in the back of his mind with Susannah, and now he's got this absolute moron sitting here, pondering, wondering, with so much on the line. He's just being... Calvin Tower is being so stubborn, and Eddie has to do everything that he can not to just jump on this bloke and start strangling him, you know? Anyway, eventually they're able to persuade this idiot to sign the contract. And after this, Eddie and Roland discover that this mysterious character, their own personal Wizard of Oz, Stephen King, is not so far away from them in this moment. And so they decide, and this is crazy, they decide that they're going to go and see Stephen King. And ladies and gentlemen, this is where things get nuts. I can imagine this next part in the book is probably a part that is divisive. Not everyone would have liked this. They would have thought it was a little bit gimmicky or silly or something. With me, in the context of the story, this isn't something that I just kind of could tolerate or I thought was, yeah, in the context, I can accept this. No, I loved this. I thought this was genius. When they were coming up to the house, I was thinking, how's this going to play out? I was kind of taking guesses at what would happen. I was thinking, oh, they get to the house and maybe Stephen King's wife's there and she goes, oh, you just missed him. He went to the market or something, and then they never make contact. He's just kind of this character that's always on the periphery. He's always out of reach. They can never truly come into contact with him. No, absolutely not. They meet him straight away. And he's standing there. And then I'm thinking, what happens now? And then Stephen King just runs away. He looks at Roland, and he's just like, he's looking at Roland. Roland's looking at him. He looks at Eddie, and then he just legs it. Really, really funny. I actually laughed out loud. It's very, very rare in a book that I audibly laugh, and this was one of those rare occasions. And this whole scene with Eddie and Roland and Stephen King all sitting together, it's such rich soil to dig from. There's so much opportunity for a kind of meta analysis of the series that Stephen King's created. And I'll tell you what I mean. I'll give you an example. One of the scenes, Eddie is talking to Stephen King, and Eddie's from Co-op City in Brooklyn. But in real life, Co-op City is in the Bronx. And I think what happened is Stephen King in real life made a mistake. And he said that Co-op City was in Brooklyn. And so when it was originally published, the drawing of the three, there's a mistake in it. And it was pointed out to him. But it's too late. It's in the book. And so what was originally a mistake is because of this device that Stephen King's using, he's able to kind of weave it into part of the story so that in Eddie's world, no, Co-op City is actually in Brooklyn. In Eddie's world. I can't, there's no other context where this works, where you're able to go back and make your mistakes intentional. It's also interesting as well, hearing Stephen King kind of relive his life. And when Roland asks him, how many times did you almost lose your life? It brings to mind a time when Stephen King was hit by a car. And I think this book is kind of insinuating maybe that the guy that was behind the wheel that hit Stephen King with his car was like an agent of the Crimson King. He's like trying to stop him from writing The Dark Tower. I don't know, but I thought that was really cool. And I just feel like this whole scene must have been really strange for Stephen King to write. There is a danger, I think, that he could have been a little bit too complimentary to himself. He might have overplayed it, but I feel like it was actually handled really well. He was quite self-effacing, and I think that's important when you're writing about yourself to be a little bit self-deprecating. Finally, we're reunited with Jake and Father Callahan, and I was thinking throughout this entire book, what's going on with Jake? Where's Jake in all this? They retrieve Black 13, and Father Callahan in this scene really steps up to the plate. And I was so happy for him because it was such a redemptive scene for Father Callahan, who's kind of been through it ever since he came up against Barlow in Salem's Lot. I think if you saw my review of Salem's Lot, you remember maybe that I spoke about how heavy it felt in that scene where Father Callahan was face to face with Barlow and his faith failed him. And just you had that feeling of devastation. And this was another chance for him. And in this moment, he realizes that the reason that his faith failed him is that he was kind of externalizing everything. He was holding the cross and he was saying to himself, as long as I have this cross, as long as I don't let go of this cross, then my faith can't fail me. But he was putting all of his faith into this is me, someone who's not really religious, right? I'm not religious at all. But he's putting all of his faith into this cross rather than letting his faith come out from within him. So I thought that was really cool that he just had that self-reflection and that moment of realization where he could redeem himself from the lessons that he'd learned along his long journey. You know, Father Callahan is just one of my favorite Stephen King characters from one of my favorite Stephen King books. So it was nice that he had a moment of redemption. And then he pickpockets a unconscious maid. So, you know, peaks and troughs, circles and roundabouts, you know. As we come up to the end of the book, Father Callahan and Jake take Black 13 and they hide it in the bottom of a really big building in New York City. And the whole time I'm thinking, hang on a minute, what's this? What building is this? What building is this? It's the World Trade Center. And I think that this can be interpreted in a few different ways, but personally, I think it's probably just a clever, creative way to wrap up that story, you know? So, all right, Black 13, we get the idea of what happened, you know, left up to the reader's interpretation, but just forget about that, that's done. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe in the next book something huge happens, but yeah, I think that's just the closing of Black 13's story. And this book is left on a massive cliffhanger. I don't know what the time between books was, but I can imagine everyone just for however long it took to come out between this book and the finale, the Dark Tower. So to kind of recap at where we left off, Susannah and Mia are about to give birth to Modred, this demon. Jake and Father Callahan are outside the Dixie Pig where Susannah is, and they're about to burst through the door. They're just kind of like psyching themselves up, and Roland and Eddie are trying to get reunited with the rest of the ka-tet. So, you know, everyone's all over the place, but it's like all of the pieces are set on the chessboard, and now we're gonna play chess. We're gonna wrap everything up. I'm terrified, I have to be honest. I don't know if you can tell. I'm a bit more animated in this video, perhaps, but I'm just so nervous about what comes next. I have to say that one of the most interesting parts of this book was the epilogue. So if you remember, or if you read it recently, the epilogue is where we find out about Stephen King and his struggle with writing The Dark Tower. We find out about his writing process and everything like that I mentioned earlier. And this actually made me feel better in a weird way. There have been times where throughout this series, I've kind of sat back and thought to myself, well, what does this mean? You know, why is this happening? What's the meaning of this scene? And I felt a little bit stupid, like things were going over my head. And very often I felt lost. So it's heartening to know that while writing this series, Stephen King felt lost a lot of the time, and he didn't know which direction things were going, and he didn't really always know what everything meant. He's the kind of writer who can put pen to paper, start off on a journey, and take the journey with the reader, discover and unravel the tale as he goes. And for me, that would be a nightmare. If I ever had to write a book or work on a project where I didn't have an idea of how it was all going to pan out, no, not for me, not for me. But for someone like Stephen King, it works really well. And the big payoff is you get weird scenarios like the one that we're going through right now. The risk is that the ending doesn't always pay off. That's a common complaint that I've had when talking about Stephen King books. There's been a few times where I thought to myself, this could have been avoided with proper plotting, So it's like that balancing act of wild, unfettered creativity matched with structure. And Stephen King has one in abundance and another not at all. Actually, he mentions one of the endings that I had a problem with when a fan writes a letter to him in this book where he's complaining about the end of The Wastelands, and he's saying, you cheated us out of an ending. That's not an ending. That's kind of how I felt as well. So when I read that, I had a big smile on my face. I felt seen. I felt heard. And I'm just glad that while Stephen King might not agree that that wasn't a very good ending, at least he knows that that is a complaint that people have. He's aware. And again, he's got that kind of self-deprecating attitude that he can admit that that wasn't everyone's cup of tea. It wasn't mine. I hated that ending. I just hope that it all pays off when we get to the end of The Dark Tower. I know it's going to be weird. Some people in the no one's given any spoilers, which I think is so fantastic, and I really appreciate from everyone. Really, really appreciate that. There's never been any spoilers. But people have kind of alluded to, get ready, Get ready for the ending. Nothing can prepare you. And I feel like I'm going into dangerous territory in the next book. What am I walking into? I've read 21 books. 22 books? And oh man, just imagine I get to the last page and it's like, by the way, you wasted all your time, you idiot. You know what I mean? You moron. All right, let's talk about the ratings and how I'm going to tackle the review of the last book. Let's do ratings. So for plot, I'm going to give the plot 3 stars. This book was much more of a kind of character-driven book, I would say, rather than plot-driven. We were mostly discovering things and setting up the finale, I think. Characters, I'm going to have to give it 5 stars because if you think about it, these are characters that I've learned to love. For over a year now, I've been reading about these characters. You've got Roland, Susannah, Jake, Eddie Dean, one of my favourite Stephen King characters, Eddie Dean, one of my favourite Stephen King characters, Father Callahan, and one of my new favourite Stephen King characters, Stephen King. The setting, I'm going to give the setting 2.5 stars. Just wandering around New York City for the most part. Nothing too original about that. But for originality, I'm going to give the book 5 stars because, listen, there were parts in this book where I was just sitting there going, this is wild, man. This is wild. I just kept thinking it over and over again in my head. This is crazy. I can't believe this is happening, Do you ever read a book where you go like, I feel like this is like a dream. Like, it's like a fever dream. That's what it felt like when Roland was sitting down with Stephen King. It's nuts. And then overall, I'm going to give the book 3.5 stars out of 5. I liked the originality. There were elements of it that I really loved and I was really shocked by, but it wasn't my favorite of the series. Definitely not. So it was good though. I liked it. And speaking of the series, it's time. It's time for The Dark Tower. We're going to reach it. And I don't know what's going to happen. I'm so nervous. This was book number 21 in my journey. This one is going to be number 22. After I've read this, I'm going to read The Gunslinger again, and that's going to be book number 23. Someone recommended it was Jimmy Mango recommended to read the Gunslinger after the series was over, and I'm mostly following his recommendation through the multiverse. The way that I'm going to handle this review is that I'm going to read up until, I would say, maybe the last couple of hundred pages, and then I'm going to sit here in front of the camera and I'm going to read the last 200 pages, or whenever I feel like we're coming up to the climax. I'm just going to sit here in front of the camera and I'm just going to record the whole thing and edit it down, right, to the highlights, and you're actually going to see my reaction to the end of this book. So I'm hoping that my review for The Dark Tower is going to come out quite quickly. I've already started the book. I'm not very far into it, but I'm just going to be tearing through it. And if you'd like to see, I'm so nervous, if you'd like to see my review for The Dark Tower, you can click up here. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks so much for joining me throughout this journey. And as always, happy reading.